Hey, session family. How y'all doing? How y'all feeling? What is up? My name is Raquel Simmons, and I am a marriage and family therapist. And you are now tuned in to In Session's very own Uncomfortable Conversation podcast. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share. Enjoy the show. Hey, family. How y'all doing? How y'all feeling? What is up? Welcome back to another episode of Uncomfortable Conversations. Today with me, I have an amazing guest. I'm going to have her introduce herself. But listen, this is like one of the best licensed marriage and family therapists there is out. So I cannot wait. You guys are in for a treat for this conversation. So Sheila, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. So I am Shelia Arias. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and the proud owner of Compasión Therapy, supporting first generation BIPOC individuals and couples in the states of New York and New Jersey. I'm all about relationships, which we will dive into with Raquel in our conversation today. But hello and good morning.
Good morning. Listen, we record all types of times of the day, and it is very early today, guys. So we're gonna start off the way we start off all of our conversations with an icebreaker card. Because you don't have them yet, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna spread them out, and you're gonna kind of just tell me when to stop, or where you wanna go. So kind of like I'm gonna bring it closer, so you can
You
kind of
can
tell
do
me
the middle area. Yeah,
middle.
that one.
This one. All right.
Yeah.
So this card says, "What am I most proud of?" Oh, that's cool.
Wow. What am I most proud of?
Mm-hmm.
I think at this stage in my life, I am most proud of being courageous and brave. I've been navigating a lot of transitions personally, professionally, in my
Nice.
practice and my business. So allowing myself to take risks and really trusting in myself despite what others have said. And again, going through like family stuff, right?
Mm.
I think that self-trust and courage is something that I'm most proud of currently in my life.
Oh, nice. That was cool. I agree. I feel like with a lot of things that's going on in life, it's so easy for you to just kind of like sit back and just watch it all happen and not kind of get involved in anything or not do anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that you just keep going and being very, I don't know, that's something to definitely be proud of. For sure, I could definitely resonate with that because in a world where we don't know if we're coming or going, we still staying persistent or still staying like on top of things, even if it's difficult or hard or all the things.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh, that's great. I'm proud of you for for still sticking through it.
Of
That's
course.
cool.
Thank you.
No problem. So, our topics today is basically around the influences that you had growing up and how that influences your relationships today. So, our first topic is how do you feel like our childhood influences our emotions as an adult?
Ooh, well, one, it's a loaded question. But to break it down a bit, I know most of us have some sort of an understanding that what happens in our childhood or what we experience, relationships, they influence how then we show up in our adult relationship.
Yeah.
But it's literally the marking point. Why? Because when we are born, right, when a baby is first born and they're
Mm-hmm.
crying, and we kind of think about the infancy age, that being is just an emotional being, which means there's no logic, there's no reason, right? Those the
Mm-hmm.
caregivers in that child's life starts to cultivate um, and teach them, right, how to reason, how to logic, right? There's a lot of influence in that.
Yeah.
And what happens is that for most of us, right, because there's cultural oppressive systems and we can kind of go down the line, we are stripped away from that, especially our
Mm.
men, right? And that's a whole other conversation. But
Mm.
um, to kind of answer your question, I guess a little short and not to elaborate too much, is it really impacts because our family are, and that can be grandparents, any adult caregivers, they're our first love classroom, right? And this is something that I take from an amazing marriage and family therapist, Dr. Alexandra Solomon. She's all about family dynamics. And that's
Mm,
where we first learn, right, how to relate, how to connect, how to give love, how to show emotion. And
mm,
depending on our experiences and how that was shaped, it shows up as we get older, right? And
mm,
then we continue being influenced by the outside world, school, work systems, right? Intimate relationships, etc. So there is a lot of influence in our childhood experience and emotions. Why? Because depending on how we learned emotions as a
mm,
kid and growing up, it's going to show up, right? If that's you're not allowed to show certain emotions or you're only allowed to show some emotions depending on your gender, sexual orientation, positioning in your family,
mm.
socioeconomic, education, right? There's so many factors that influence that. So again, to answer your question, there is a lot, right, of what's the word I want to use? Correlation in how we then express our emotions or the lack of expression due to how we learned how to relate to those emotions. So all of our emotions, to our inner world as a child.
Right. I agree. So I'm just trying as you're talking, I'm just thinking like, how did I see so much emotion growing up for myself, and how does that show up? I don't know. I feel like a lot of my emotions that I've like picked up or learned is like very recent. Like I don't know, just being in like a that strong, independent woman kind of family household, you don't really have too much time, or you don't see too much of like the breaking down, and how do you pick yourself back up when you're just always on go, especially being from like New York. Everyone is just like on go mode, and you never really see much emotion. You never really see I mean, you see like the generic more like happy, nervous, kind of sad, like those type of generic ones, and I think those are normal, but you never really see, or for me anyway, um, not being exposed to many down areas, or how to pick yourself back up when you're feeling down, or are you even allowed to feel down when everything is on go and you have to provide and be present for your family? Like, how do you feel like that would like influence a person where they're able to just only see like that single independent black woman or Latina woman who's just like on go mode all the time, and then when it comes to their emotional relationships or romantic relationships, it's like they're not present.
Yeah, I mean, we can go. It's interesting you were saying on the go. We've been conditioned as Black women, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's why I really love to focus my work on the first generation experience. And this necessarily doesn't mean like first generation, like immigrant coming from a different country. That is one way, but it can be,
Mm-hmm.
you can be the first to go to college, right? The
Yeah.
first to make X amount of money compared to your family, the first to have PTO, right?
Mm.
Being able to kind of have some of these resources that our families lack. So what happens is that for generations, due to these oppressive systems, we've been in survival mode. So that
Yeah.
strong, independent woman, it's not just us, it's
Mm-hmm.
generationally. Think about, right?
Yeah.
All the women in your family, even going up, like you don't have time to sit and be depressed, right? And stress
Yeah.
about. You have to maybe cry while you're showering or whatever it is, get
Mm-hmm.
yourself together and continue because we were taught to be selfless, right? Which is we have to be there for our families. We have to kind of show up in this way. So we end up neglecting. And that is taught again since a young age. And I know there's different circumstances and unique experiences for each family system, but that starts to shape that child life,
Yeah.
right? Or those children, if there's multiple, right? And usually we play certain roles just to make sure as a child that the family is okay, right? Think
Yeah.
about the kid where maybe you're like, ooh, I don't want to tell my mom that I'm upset that my best friend did X, Y, and Z because she's already
Mm-hmm.
too stressed, right? You don't want to contribute to the stress of the family. So that's already a starting point of my
Wow.
feelings don't matter. And this can be
Wow.
at 4, at 5, at 15.
Wow. That's so cool. Like, first off, I never even thought about that. Like how we're just like we're so young and we just like, I see, I'm not even gonna mention it. Let me try to figure it out. Um and those are five, like you said. We're 5 years old, we spill something, or oh my God, I'm freaking out. I don't even want to tell my mom. Let me try to hurry up, because you already know that they are stressed, or your parents, you can see, literally
You
see that they're
observe.
going through a
Children
lot.
are, right? We talk about children are sponges. Children are constantly observing and they don't
Hmm.
really, yes, we can tell them what to do and that might fit with them for a bit, but it's more the interactions and the behavior. So
Yeah.
if your kid is coming home and they're trying to show you what they did and you're like, yeah, you're cooking, you're doing this, like, yeah, the narrative that child is creating is mommy's too busy or daddy, right? Whoever the caregiver is, they're too
Hmm.
busy, they don't have time. If you have anxiety and you're manifesting a certain way, they're gonna learn like that feeling is okay, right? This one
Yeah.
isn't, right? You're going to really start to shape and cultivate this narrative of what's okay, what's not. And
Hmm.
again, a kid just wants conditional love, which means they're gonna do everything in their power, right? However, that 5-year-old brain can conceptualize
Yeah.
to not contribute to the stress, right? Let me just sit here. Right. Or even when a kid acts up, think about that. That is them knowing and they have a right to say, like, I need this. Because
Hmm.
again, children are emotional beings, but
Yeah.
yet adults don't have that information. We haven't been conditioned or taught. So what
Hmm.
do? We hit them, we punish them in certain ways just for them to like relax and not be in our faces because we
Yeah.
get triggered, right? But again, as young children, we all have certain engagements and experiences that start to say like don't take up too much space, and I think particularly
Mm.
as little black girls, little black and brown girls are taught don't take up too much space. So then we go into other things, right? And we can, there's a whole list of things that we can go into, but that is the starting point of how our emotions are shaped as a child, and then how we start to, at this point that becomes the narrative. So it shifts, right? It doesn't look exactly the same, but it's the same pattern as you continue. And then, of course, in romantic relationships.
Yeah. What? Don't take up too much space. That's like what? Like you go into a little bit more on that.
At least for me, and I want to speak from more from a Latina perspective and
Hmm.
being a first gen immigrant. So the sense of belonging is huge. And I'm sure you have, and again, all black and brown communities all experience like not belonging in so many
Yeah.
different ways.
Yeah.
But I think for me, my experience is my mom was like 8 months pregnant when she came from Dominican Republic. She had me like
Mm.
2 weeks later. Um, so growing up, it was like I need to make sure that I stay like under the radar, make sure I do
Mm.
everything good because at the end of the day, we are foreigners, right? And we can
Yeah.
see the state of this country now. And again, 30 plus years ago, it was different, but there was still that sense of like, you're different, you're not us.
Yeah.
So we're taught not only don't take up space, don't make up too much noise because we want to make sure that we're accepted in our society, in our community, but even within our own families. You
Mm.
can't take up, you kids don't talk, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I'm sure there's different versions and sayings of that, but in Latino households, it's pretty much the same. Kids don't have a right. You do as I say, right? If not, you're gonna get your ass beat, right? It's not a
Yeah.
thing about taking away privileges because at this point there aren't any privileges, right? You learn to function in that way because one, you're afraid of the consequences, and again, that child wants to be loved. So at the end of the day, when a child is obedient or follows certain directions, is I want to make sure my parents aren't upset. I want to make
Yeah.
sure that I belong in my family. Forget about even the
Wow.
world. I want to make sure I belong in my family. If
Yeah.
someone's upset, that's saying that I don't belong here because I did something bad, right? So
Hmm.
taking up space goes back to you have to shut yourself down for the
Hmm.
greater good, right? To belong.
Wow. Wow.
And again, we can talk about so many different marginalized. The first marginalized community are children. Children have
Mm.
no rights, which we need to start to really reframe that, right? Because at the end of the day,
Hmm.
children are human. And then we can talk about, right, different cultural backgrounds, immigrants, that LGBTQ plus community. Like we can go
Yeah.
down the list of marginalized communities and this wound of not belonging and how that manifests. And usually starts in our family system again. So then that starts to curate for what happens. We get older, we go into jobs, we don't know how to advocate for ourselves. We don't know how to
Mm.
advocate for ourselves in romantic relationships, right? You're like, it's fine, right? Someone disrespects you or crosses the boundary. We don't really say much because,
Hmm.
again, we don't think we have a right to do so because that's what we were told directly or
Yeah.
indirectly in our family system.
Hmm.
So it really starts to trickle down. Um, But again, women are specifically, I want to say women and women of color. And again, in general, I think these marginalized communities cannot take up space because if you take up space, X, Y, and Z might happen, which
Mm-hmm.
sometimes is not true, right? It's more of the fear, the projection, right? If you
Yeah.
do this, this is going to happen. But then that's why as adults, we then have to learn, like, do we really think that's true?
Mm-hmm.
And can I own my narrative of wanting to show up in this way and work through the consequences if they are, right? Any, right?
Mm-hmm.
And really work through the discomfort of what it may look like if I do start to take up space in my
Yeah.
romantic relationship, at my job, in my
Mm-hmm.
community, in my family system. Like what is going to happen?
Yeah. It's like testing the waters, like trying to figure out, like, is this okay? Kind of like the tiptoe and like, oh, I want to speak up, but I don't know. I'm not trying to get penalized for doing so because that's something that we was definitely taught and trained to do. Oh, that's
Mm-hmm.
thank. I'm like, I was just like so soaking it up because I'm like, wow, that is so true, and that's like, of course, a lot of us know all of our experiences come from childhood experiences, but to go into depth on, how we, already conditioned without even knowing what we're doing yet, which is just the wildest thing in the world. So thank you. Thank you for
The
that.
brain
So
is an interesting organ, right?
yeah,
It
it
protects
is
us.
just
So
soaking things
eventually,
up.
yeah, so eventually it becomes so like automatic that we don't know that we're going into this until we are noticing stressors, right? Either
Mm-hmm.
again, depression, anxiety, like just internal
Yeah.
stresses, but then relational stresses, right? How come I can never find a man or a girl or this? Like, how come I'm constantly jumping from job to job? Like, you start to see this pattern, like in your behavior and
Mm,
external world, that starts to create questions. And if it's someone who has curiosity and it's like, you know what, I don't want this to be my life, then you start to really do the work, right? If you're open
yeah.
to it. But it does require seeing external things and consequences and like hitting rock bottom and all these different things to acknowledge how, again, your experiences growing up really influence, right? How do you show up in this world and how do you see yourself too,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
that is so true. Oh my goodness. I'm like, podcast over. Like this, that's it. Because that is so true. Like, oh my goodness. Okay. Our next point is kind of going into what you're saying is how was our emotions shown in the home and how it shaped you. That's kind of we kind of spoke on that and touched on that is especially when me saying just like seeing like that whole independent woman household and this is it's strange because it's like some it's different. It's obviously different for each person and how we experiences those different levels of emotion. And for me, for example, I've grown up in both parent household, but I was able to see like my mom take the lead a lot in all of the household things. And granted, they both work. I'm sure they both paid the bills. I'm not sure. I was not privy to like all of those type of conversations, but you can definitely see in the household like my mom was like had like leader and so translating that into different forms of like romantic partnerships. Um, I don't know. I think I always took like this like I don't need help. I'm the leader kind of personality, and it's just me accepting help is like I don't know if I don't know what would happen to me if I like I feel like if I ask for help, I'm gonna like melt or something. Like I am going to start decomposing or something.
Mm-hmm.
But that's only because of that whole, what I've been able to be taught of I got it, I'm trying to figure it out. Like do why wait for somebody to do something you could do for yourself and just going and not really asking for help. I mean, my mom still has troubles asking for help. We had a conversation recently of like, this is why we don't know how to ask for help because look at you. You don't even know what you're doing. Yeah, no, I remember this is like quick little random story. She was trying to put together this pack and play for my nephew. and she had no idea what she was doing. Like, no idea. You could tell she was just struggling, trying to figure it out, getting frustrated.
Those baby gadgets are the worst.
First, it's so much pieces. It was like insane. And it's like three other people in the room, and we're all just watching her, seeing that she has no idea. And me in particular, I'm waiting for her to ask for help because I'm just like, she's not gonna ask. And I'm like, in that moment, I had like this like light bulb, like, that's where I get it from. This lady has no idea what she's doing. It's so many other people here. We're obviously we then helped, but then I had to speak to her and tell her like, this is why we don't know how to ask for help. Because look at you, you don't even know what you're doing. It's so many pieces. It's gonna take more than one person to figure this out. Because, like you said, baby gadgets. It's so much going on, and I'm just like, wow, this is why I don't know how to ask for help. Because this lady will rather struggle, like struggle, get frustrated, and all instead of just asking, like, oh my god, can you guys help me? I don't know what I'm doing. And it was
Yeah,
just
but
like such a
even
light bulb moment. Like it was just like, wow, this is crazy. Like this is
no,
why I'm like this.
yeah, I would even invite you to, right? I think something fascinating when we're able to highlight and bring those things up with like our parents is
Hmm.
getting into conversation and learning about her experiences growing up and her
Hmm.
just like her relationship with, let's say, her mom and other women. Because again, this is so embedded like generationally, this
Hmm.
like hardworking, don't ask for help, like hyper independence woman. We've had to, right?
Yeah.
And and I say we had to because similar to me, my mom was the same because my dad wasn't there really, right? He was there financially, he wasn't there really, and still this to this day, that's a whole other conversation. But
Hmm.
even dads who are present financially, they didn't know how to show up at any of it because again, our men were
Yeah.
conditioned to be just providers. So at the end of the day, your mom still has to take in the reign of making sure the kids are fed and clean and
Hmm.
homework and kind of the child rearing. So
Yeah.
we've been given this responsibility, but in a way we have to do it to survive because who else is going to do it, right?
Yeah.
And it's against generationally being part of these oppressive systems because I think that's really where it started, where we were stripped away, our men were stripped away, we were stripped away, and then it has been passed down. And
Hmm.
now the newer generations are trying to break that cycle, and it's hard. So even when you're saying you're going to melt, one thing I do with my clients is like, you want to catastrophize? Let's go ahead. Let's go through all the worst case scenarios. So if you do this, what's going to happen? Why? Because it allows you to process. And as you
Hmm.
start to hear yourself, you start to catch like that's silly. Do I really think I'm gonna melt if I don't know, tell the guy in the supermarket to like help me with my bag to the car, right? Like,
Hmm.
and I'm also saying this because I heard it from another great therapist. I forgot who it was, but it's like you start small. So even in the process of wanting to allow support and receive is you might not go with anything big. You might go again with like someone holding the door for you, someone like, when they're like, oh yeah,
Hmm.
can I bag your bags in the supermarket? Oh, I mean your groceries? Sure, you can, right? Like
Yeah.
starting off because it's allowing yourself to go through the discomfort, but again, really going through the worst case scenarios. What I really think is going to happen. And also, we deprive ourselves from connection, right? Those are more like external, like superficial things. But in a romantic relationship, when you're like, you know what, babe, like I really need support in this way, it really
Hmm.
allows you to connect more intimately with your partner emotionally.
Yeah.
Who often complain, oh, he or she, they're not emotionally available. They can't do this. But again, we've
Hmm.
been conditioned. And that hyper independence creates that blocker for you to even integrate with your partner in any way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this goes in both again. And it doesn't matter if you're a gay, straight, queer, why, because I've worked with the
Hmm.
spectrum of couples and I see this dynamic in queer couples, gay, straight. I see it. Why?
All of
Because
it.
we live in a unfortunately heteronormative world.
Hmm.
And you learn this, right? So that queer couple saw their parents and saw other, right? So it still manifests, and
Hmm.
being able to really highlight that is
Hmm.
important. And it's empowering once you get a sense of like, wow, like this isn't really working for me. I don't want to, but then I don't know how to move away for it. It's like then we start to practice, right? Like how do we do smaller things? How can we
Yeah.
at least process again out loud, like what do I think is going to happen if I do ask my partner where I even tell my partner that I'm really stressed and scared about what's going to happen at work,
Mm-hmm.
for example, right? Because then that's connected to finances, and those are finances. Money is a huge topic, right, with
Is a
couples, and couples usually don't like to talk about it, but it's like we have to start somewhere, right? So
mm-hmm.
again, it's been a measure of survival to be
Yeah.
hyper independent and not ask for help.
Yeah, that's so crazy. I was just having a conversation literally yesterday about like being raised off of survival and coming in contact with my partner who is just very, very chill. And it's just like, why aren't you freaking out? Like, what, it's just like everything is not here. Like, calm down. But anyway, so the next thing I kind of want to speak about is something you touched on, which is the gender roles within the family. You started to talk about that very briefly because you were saying, in men is definitely you can see the difference between like being raised as a female and being raised as men and how we like the emotions are widely different as if we become less of people and more of our gender, which is craziness. So I do know that you had a conversation. So anybody who is watching, make sure you guys go back to her Instagram, which I'll post, or in the comments. She had an amazing conversation with, I don't know how to say that, like
Machismo.
machismo. I don't
You
know
said it
exactly how to
good.
say the word, but overall, I watched it. It was great, by the way, and it was speaking just about the same thing here, like the gender roles of and how men are looked at within the family versus women, and the roles that they are told to play, like the unspoken rules of you have to be this way, you can't show emotion, you can't do this, you can't do that, and it's like you're stripping men away from their person, like you're stripping them away from actually being a person, because all people have emotion, and all people have the right to feel. But men, when they're looked at as men, it's like, no, you have to be strong, you have to be a provider. When women, we're like very dainty and delicate and like, so kind of speak towards that, and like how do you feel like being a woman or a young girl would had an impact on the way you show emotion now?
Yeah, well, going back to what you're saying, the conversation, yeah, it was just on like machismo and men's mental health. And again, machismo is just a version of toxic masculinity. And I think there's so many parallels when we have these conversations, particularly from men of color.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's a whole conversation within itself. But gender roles does really influence why, because these are social constructs that by the time, again, a baby. And I'm also going to come from experience. Like I have a 2.5-year-old boy, right? And then I have
Mm-hmm.
an 11-year-old girl. And yeah, they say boys tend to be more hyper and active and moving along, whatever. My son is very expressive, right? He gets pissed off easily, which he has every right as a toddler. He does not know what emotional regulation is, and that is us as the parents have to support.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I forgot what he did, and like my husband got pissed off, and like he got at his level and it was like, you don't do that, right? And I'm like
Mm-hmm.
looking at it, let it be, right? But then afterwards, I was like, I really want you to think about what you just said. Because if this was Janelyn, our 11-year-old at the time when she was a toddler, do you think you would do that? And
Mm.
he smirked because it's true. I see this way too often. I'm sure you go to any place with their children, or even in your experience, right? When if you
Mm-hmm.
have children, like girls are treated differently. If a little
Yeah.
girl falls and she's like, "Oh my God, mommy or daddy, like I scraped my knee," you're like, "Oh, you coddle her, you like whatever."
Mm-hmm.
It's a boy, you're like, "You're gonna be fine. Get up and keep it moving," right? Like
Yeah.
totally dismissed. Again, I'm saying those examples because that's how it starts. It's
Mm-hmm.
not so much directly of like you shouldn't be crying. Like yeah, and these things are said, but it's those again implicit messages.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, I got hurt and I was upset, and my parents told me that it's not okay to be upset. So what happens is that the
Mm.
next time I get hurt, I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah.
It continues, and then hurt means many things. It can be physically, it can be emotionally, right? Like I'm not allowed to say that I'm hurt,
Yeah.
so I need to suppress it. So what happens is that we then learn to cope. As
Mm-hmm.
humans, we all cope to survive. And then
Yeah.
that starts to evolve and it starts to show up in different ways that are not constructive in our
Yeah.
young boys. And then in our girls, again, even depending, yes, we are allowed to show a little bit more emotion, but even then, we're still stripped away from it because there's still certain emotions that we're not allowed to use, right? If we are
Mm-hmm.
assertive, we're called a bitch, right? I'm sorry, I don't know
Yeah.
if we can curse here, but
It's okay. It's
right, like
okay.
we're seen as like, oh, this angry black woman or this and that because society doesn't know how to just take someone who's assertive and is expressive, right? So again, going back to taking up so much space, you're supposed to be dainty and quiet and like express you're
Mm-hmm.
in a low tone. But if you raise your voice in any way, again, you're taking up space, which means it doesn't align with the societal norm or
Right.
narrative of how women are supposed to show up. And
Yeah.
yes, there's gender roles and when it comes to emotions, and then there's more specific, I think, when it comes to people of color because
Mm-hmm.
there's extra layers and complexities to that as well.
Yeah. I agree. It's the weirdest thing in the world because it's like what happened, and this is probably a whole different conversation, but like what happened where that split just became like so normative, like what you said, the example of, your husband treating your daughter and your son differently, and it's not even on purpose. You don't even think about, like, oh my goodness, like I'm doing this again, or I'm treating my son more like rougher than my daughter. And it's something that just like, it's just natural. It's just like the boys will be boys comment is, and it's just so natural to just immediately go there. And I'm just like, who started this? Like, how do we get here, and how hard do we have to work to unlearn that? Especially when it's like super like embedded in our brain. It's just like, oh, he's a boy, he'll get over it. And then when they get older, like you just said, which is huge, of me showing emotion for pain is not accepted. And so when they get older, that narrative just still replays. It's like, okay, I'm not supposed to show that I'm hurt. I'm not supposed to show that this is affecting me. And I know men now that don't know how to express themselves. I mean, I know a plethora of men that don't know how to express themselves, who don't feel comfortable with doing so, who feel very weak and like, weak in their vulnerability in order to say
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, I'm not okay. God forbid they are not okay. And it's like, they're melting. But yeah, in reality, it's like, no, it's okay the best part of being a human is to be able to express yourself, is to be able to
Mm-hmm.
say like, this is not cool, to be able to express yourself so that we can work through it. You can't work through something that I don't know. We can't work through something that you're not communicating. It's almost impossible. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
that was like beautifully said. Last part, and then we're gonna kind of switch gears. The part that I want to kind of speak about is the position that we have in our families, like the position and that. So, for example, I am not the youngest, but I am the oldest girl. That makes sense. Yeah, I'm the
What
oldest.
is, how many
Oldest.
siblings do you have?
So I have four siblings. Well, it's four of us.
Okay.
Um, and I have a twin sister. So we're obviously the same age. But so then I have two older brothers. So I think my
So it's the two
position.
brothers and then you and your twin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so I feel like the position is very weird. Because I'm not necessarily the oldest, I'm not necessarily the middle, I'm not like, it's just I'm in a very weird space because I'm older than my sister, but only by like 6 minutes. So it's like big whoop. But the way I was raised is I am the older sister, which is like the strangest thing because like, what, we're the same age. What are you talking about?
Yeah, but
But
your personalities are different. So we can kind
yes,
of go into
our
that. Mm-hmm.
personalities are widely different. And I think it's because of the position that we play in our like sibling roles. Because I think, like, I don't know, I was raised, like I said, as the older sister, even though we are the same age. So, like, I don't feel like, in my opinion, I have much room because there's like my sister is watching me. it's just the weirdest thing because it's like very trippy because we're twins, but in a way I feel like she's watching me. She's paying attention to the way I move. I have to make sure that I'm moving in the right way. So I'm leading by example, leading a good example. But then I go back and forth, but it's like, wait, we're the same age. It's not fair. Like, how can I want to be able to feel free enough to make certain mistakes and know that I have like a cushion to fall back on, but that's not the case for me because I'm like, no, I'm like the oldest girl. It's so much pressure to be, in my opinion, like the oldest girl because it's like you have to think logically and navigate towards different things, and you don't really have much time or space to think about something that does not make sense. You gotta make sense of things. So I don't know.
Mhm.
What is your take on like the position and the roles that we play in siblings?
Yeah, I mean, positions do play a lot in how we then show up, right? So the eldest, right, I think it's common to have a lot of pressure, expectations, but also they're the first. So it's like, okay, they're gonna show up a certain way. Then the second, and I'm just gonna go down to you, right? Because you
Mm-hmm.
said there's two boys, and I would be curious to know like what were their roles or how did they show up, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
what were the expectations? But for you and your sister, when I mentioned the personality, which you say you're totally different, I'm also curious, right? Because think about when kids are young and you're like, oh yeah, you're so mature, you're so this. Like, I'm wondering if for you was like the maturity, like you had this other inclination of like, okay, I need to show up in this way, where you
Mm-hmm.
took again responsibility because you wanted to minimize stressors and chaos in your family system, where maybe
Mm-hmm.
your sister wasn't showing up in that way. So if that wasn't, I'm going to use opportunity. I don't think that's the word I want to use. That's what's coming to mind. If there was space for an opportunity for you to show up in that way to receive maybe what you needed at the time, and this was like certain ways of showing love or connection with your
Mm-hmm.
parents, you did because that's what kids do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then you were given the title of, okay, now you are the eldest, right, girl in the
Mm-hmm.
family because you already show that you can and you started to function in that way. So sibling positioning matters because it also depends where the parents are. So where you were the third child, so I know your parents were in a different stage in their life by the time you and your sister came, right? They
Yes.
raised two boys. I don't know what the age difference is, but they had raised two boys. I'm sure financially were different. I don't know if they were in the same house or in the same environment.
Mm.
Like we can grow up in the same household and every child is going to experience our parents differently
Yes.
because
Yes.
again, our parents are not the same, right? Me and my brother are 4 years apart. My brother was four when my mom came from Dominican Republic, right? He was born in DR, and then I was
Mm.
born here. So he already had there was a whole different like experience for him as
Yeah.
I grew up, right? But it's funny, I'm not the eldest, but I also have, it's either you're the firstborn daughter or the eldest daughter, you have like this huge responsibility of like holding down the fort for your family in so many ways, but unspoken,
Mm.
like you said, because there's just this thing that's like we inherit. But again, the positioning does matter, again, because our parents are in different stages, but
Mm.
also how does that child show up? Right. So I think despite you and your sister being twins, the same age, I don't think it's so much the age, it's how did you show up as you
Mm.
were growing up that
Mm.
gave the inclination to your mom or to your dad as well that you know what Raquel is the person, right? She's the one who's like mature and responsible. So I can tell her to help me with this paperwork or my
Yeah.
case, translate, right? Because I was a translator by the time I was like seven, right? Like translate this document. Oh, what are they saying? Right? Like
Yeah.
these adult responsibilities are given because again, how are we showing up?
Mm.
And then I'm gonna take a little turn because yes, I bring up um sibling positioning, but I like to focus more on the role that we really take on in our family system and the few roles that, and again, this is not mine. I can provide your recall with like the information of the therapist because
Mm.
again, she has a lot of great worksheets and like she has a podcast and like, a lot of good information on this, but it's more of the roles that we play to make sure that we remain um, the family remains pretty okay, right?
Yeah.
And in family therapy, it's homeostasis, right? Like we want to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that things are okay despite things happening with each member. So the
Mm-hmm.
roles are the perfect one, which means that the function of that, and that's me. I play the perfect one. I always made sure that I did great in school, that I didn't get in trouble, that I cleaned the
Mm-hmm.
house, right? Which definitely a lot of anxiety, right? And I had to work through that even as an adult and creating my own family when it comes to just cleaning, right? And I think sometimes we say, oh, yeah, you're like OCD. No, that is anxiety, right? And it might
Wow.
seem pretty minute, but
Wow.
when you
Wow.
are taught you have to do this, or if not, that ends up being ingrained in you where you're so rigid that you cannot allow yourself to be flexible, right? So for me, again, I was the perfect one because I had to prove that the family was okay.
Mm.
My parents' relationship has always been super complex with my dad, like cheating and having other kids outside of the marriage. My brother didn't have the best teenage years, like school and like all these other things, right? So I had to make sure that I was okay to say, you know what, yeah, like this is happening with my parents and with my brother, but look, we're okay because I'm like selling, right? And everything,
Yeah.
I'm doing
Wow.
all this,
Wow.
right? So with each role, there's a function, right? And again, I can send you this worksheet. And then with the function, right, the function for the perfect one is the family's okay. We then gain gifts, right, which is performance, confidence. Like I've always been pretty good in performing and being confident in the work that I do. I'm my working wise professional throughout my school years. But then my
Mm-hmm.
challenge is that I can expect a lot from others. How come you
Mm.
can't do this but I can, right?
Mm. That's good.
Right. So that's the
That's
challenge. And it's
good.
funny because me and my husband are both the perfect one in our family. Like there's a quiz to this, which is cool. Like I have couples do it because
Wow.
again, it tells us a lot like what role did we play because it shows up in our romantic relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, that we expect a lot from our partners, right? We
Mm.
expect their partners to function the way that we are. How come you can't do this the way, right? How
Yeah.
come you can't take care of a kid this way? How come you can't do work? How come, right? Like there's so
Yeah.
much pressure in that,
Yep.
and it ends up really creating the stress in any romantic relationship. And I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
go through them briefly because I don't want to take too much time with it. But there's the easy one, right? The easy one reduces the stress. And the big people, in this case, parents or whoever the caregivers are, they're independent, they're flexible. When then you're flexible and you're like, you don't take up space, then it's difficult for you to be vulnerable, ask for help,
Mm.
right?
Wow.
And you might resonate with a few, right? I've had clients who are like, oh yeah, I fit in like a few of them or one of them. But again, the easy
Right.
one, it's like when you're easy, you kind of like your shapeshift, right? I fit
Mm.
wherever I need to fit,
Right.
and
Right.
I
Right.
don't really share how I feel because then that's going to shake up the system, right?
Yeah.
And
Wow.
there's the struggling one, right? The struggling one usually it's that kid. I would say my brother was pretty much the struggling one in a way, and I know he fit into some other roles too. But at some point in his teenage years, right, because everyone was eyes on him because he wasn't doing good in school, like it was just he was getting in trouble, like that many different things, right? So
Mm-hmm.
everyone's attention and energy is on that kid,
On him.
right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's disability, mental health, substance use, whatever the thing is, right? It's around them, and then eventually they can advocate for themselves, right? And they become resilient, but then there's this independence on other people
Yeah.
because the eyes were on them. It's like I have to depend, I need validation. They can't really speak up
Mm-hmm.
for themselves. So it kind
Wow.
of goes into that. The
Makes
peacemaker,
sense.
right? We
That
want
makes
everyone to get along, right? They're compassionate, they protect, they collaborate. We want to make sure everyone's on the same page. Then they suppress their own emotions, particularly
wow.
anger, right? The bigger emotions, difficult identifying own emotions because, again, the common good. I cannot take up
Mm.
space because I want to make sure that everyone else is good. And
Yeah.
I think most of us fall into the helper slash parentified child where we take on the responsibilities to make
Yeah.
sure that the family is okay,
Everybody's
right?
okay.
Yeah. So we can be empathetic, patient. Then we have difficulties with boundaries and we need others to need us, right? Think about like
Mm.
maybe in our personal experiences or people we may know, which is like they constantly want to help others, but yet they're
Mm-hmm.
struggling. It's okay. I don't have to do this. Come, let me help you. Right. They kind of go into
Right.
this like superhero. And I see this a lot
Mm-hmm.
with clients, right? Where they want to make sure that they can fix or really not even what is save is the word that I was because it's not even help save. At this point, it's like I want to save you from your
Yeah.
experiences, right? So they become hyper fixated that they neglect their own needs,
Yep.
right? And what's happening. And then there's the rebel, which is they do whatever they want, they don't care. Right? They usually can be like the black sheep of the family. They're the
Mm-hmm.
unconventional folks. And their gifts can be that they're courageous, right? They usually, advocate for justice, leadership, but then it's hard for them to connect with others
Mm.
because they don't want to conform to the narrative
Yeah.
of whatever is normal, right? I want to be
Mm-hmm.
different. There's hypervigilance, and there's also a lot of anxiety in that because it's like, I know I'm different, but how can I connect here
Right.
if I don't want to follow this, right? This narrative or whatever the thing is. So, again, these are the roles that I did not come up with, so I'm not going to take credit. This is, again, from Alexandra's work, and like she highlights a lot of just different theoretical approaches in this. But I think it's pretty interesting when we go through this and we think about our own upbringing and how
Mm.
that has influenced our relationship not only with our family and our siblings, but then also with our adult relationships.
Yes.
And this can be romantic, but also other significant, right? If these are close
Mm-hmm.
friends that we have, like how do we show up in those relationships? And we usually show up in these ways because if we learn to be that in our first intimate relationship, which is our family, we then do that in any other intimate relationships.
Exactly.
Right?
Wow. So
I know I
I'm
shared a
like,
lot.
no, it's cool. I want everybody who's listening, comment down below. Like, which one do you feel like what categories do you feel like you fall into? I'm definitely curious. I actually just did a episode with one of my friends about friendship. And so I think that this is like kind of right on topic with it. And I'm interested to know, like, I want her to like specifically look at this and like see which one she falls in because our conversation was falling around the same thing of like friendships, the lack thereof, or transitioning different friendships and what roles we play into the friendship. So it doesn't even have to be romantic relationships, just like how we show up in our friendships and how that is influenced by the position or the roles that we played within our family dynamics. So definitely, you guys comment down below. I know I fit into like three of them.
And we
Definitely.
can evolve, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
again, depending the circumstances, you could have been the perfect one and then you switch, right? I have a couple
Yes.
that I know he at one point he was a rebel and then he turned into the struggling one, right? So
Mm.
it can evolve. So it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to fit into one, but really depending the circumstances, experiences, the transitions that happen in families, like how do we fall? And yes, Raquel, like you said, it definitely shows up in friendships. Think about the significant intimate relationships. Intimate relationships, we usually think it's like romantic. Intimate is anyone that you can really connect with emotionally and have that
Mm-hmm.
space. And that can be platonic in a friendship or
Yeah.
it can be romantic. And we can definitely fall into these roles in that because we want to make sure that we are important, that we're prioritized in our friendships.
Yeah.
And if there's anxiety around that, we can easily switch into like, oh, let me people please, or let me not say
Yeah.
anything about this, or my friend has been late for the thousandth time, and I'm always like, oh, it's okay. Every time we're gonna go have dinner, right? And it's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
like it's not okay. But you can see how it's you're functioning from this place, right? That this role that you
Yeah.
played in your family.
Wow. Or even the position of being like the perfect one and then seeing the struggling one get so much attention that you then try to fall back into that position just to so that you can get that type of attention or validation because being like that perfect one isn't getting you anything but great grades. It's just like, wait, I
Mhm.
got good grades, how come you're not seeing me, how come you're only seeing the one? And I see this in a lot of children where you see like they're excelling academically, but then they see that the one who is disrupting the classrooms are getting the most attention, and now they just shift behaviors and no one knows why. And it's just like, wait, what happened? But it's typically because they're not getting that same level of attention that they thought they would be by getting the good grades as if they were acting out.
Mhm.
So it's definitely interesting, the position. So We're going to switch gears. We have two different scenarios that I kind of want us to discuss, and we're going to respond in the way as if this was like a client coming to us with these different scenarios and like how we will respond. So the scenario one says, I'm the oldest of seven. I spent a lot of time of my childhood caring for my siblings due to my mom being a single mom and having to work long hours to care for my sibling and I. What are some possible challenges I may face within my romantic relationships, and what kind of attachment styles may I face within my romantic relationships as well? So overall, being the oldest, taking care of your siblings and kind of taking on that mother role because you were raised by a single mom who was never really home. So this client wants to know what kind of challenges do may this person face within their romantic or intimate relationships, being raised this way.
It can go either way. Usually, as humans, we go into the extremes, right? We want to do it. We do exactly what we saw growing up, or we do the total opposite. So
Mm-hmm.
she can easily go into, like you said, a caregiving role of
Mm-hmm.
making sure that their partner's okay, neglecting their own needs. And many
Yes.
women do this again in heterosexual relationships, and I can also see it in queer relationships, but
Mm-hmm.
where we push our own needs aside for the sake of wanting to show up in this way, right? I was able
Yeah.
to receive, I'm sure as the oldest of seven, this person, right, received praise somehow, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
from mom of like, thank you for doing this, or like,
Yes.
even if it wasn't to that extent, like receive some praise of showing up in this role because it was
Yeah.
needed, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can go in the direction of showing up pretty similar. Of
Right.
And not saying that nurturing is not needed. You still need to be a nurturer in a romantic
Mm-hmm.
relationship, but not
Yeah.
your main role, which is like everything about you and nothing about me. Or
Mm-hmm.
it can be the opposite, right? I don't really need you, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
here, but then there's also a hyper independence of I don't want to have to care for you, and I don't need you to care
Yes.
for me. So then there
Mm-hmm.
also creates a disconnect of not that it's I'm trying to see how I can kind of frame this because it is complex. But going back to this hyper independence of I had to take on this role, so now I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So it's like
Mm-hmm.
you figure your own things out in a way. There isn't a lot of collaboration, right? There
Mm-hmm.
can be a lot of expectations. Like I had to do this, and how come you can't do it, right?
Yeah.
So it can go in either direction. And to kind of go into a little bit of attachment styles, there's not a big theoretical space that I go into, but essentially attachment is just like how do we relate an intimate close
Mm-hmm.
relationship, right? And it can be pretty anxious avoidant,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? The
Mm-hmm.
fear of what is the word that I want to use? The binary, right? Of I want closeness, but yet I don't.
Yeah. Yep. It's like come like you want people someone to be like next to you, but then you just kind of want them away, but you don't really know how to communicate that because internally you don't even know what you want in a way.
On top of
So
that,
yeah.
you weren't like allowed to, right? You have to
Mm-hmm.
take care of your siblings because it is what it is. You couldn't complain and say, I'm a kid too.
Mm-hmm.
This is not my job because you have to survive, right? So
Mm-hmm.
again, some of the challenges that can come up and being able to be mindful for this person is what are you noticing that you're doing, right? In the dating
Mm-hmm.
phase or even once you're in the committed relationship that might be neglecting, that you might be pushing aside, where you have like an
Mm-hmm.
ink or pinch, right? And you're like, oh no, that's fine. But you know that it's
Right.
not okay, right? Like listening to those little intuitions, like gut feelings, however you want to call it, is important because we too often neglect until it becomes a bigger issue
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of wanting, right? Yearning for a relationship.
Right.
In the
For
same way
sure.
as the opposite, right? Figuring out like, okay, how come when my partner says, hey, do you need this or that I push, right? I don't allow myself to receive.
Mm.
right? Because I
Yeah.
don't want that connection either in that way. I don't want for you to think that I need you in this way.
Right. Oh my goodness, that's big. Because you don't want to feel like you need anybody. Oh my God. I used to be listen, I've done a lot of self-work, but I used to be like that where it's just like, no, I don't need you here. Like, I got it. I want you here, but I don't really need you here. But I need you to know that I don't need you here. But you being here is cool. It's like, what? Girl, I don't know. Anyway, it was a lot going
Using
on.
as message, and I get it, right? But the
Mm-hmm.
fact that you are becoming curious of not only what are the influences of that, but also
Yeah.
do you want to change that narrative? And I think
Mm-hmm.
asking ourselves, do I really want genuine connection with a romantic partner, right? And going through the worst case scenarios, what do I think is going to be the worst thing if I do this?
Yeah.
Because it's just taking the leap, right? If you haven't seen Inside Out 2, that's like a perfect like
Yeah, I did see it. It's such a good movie.
visual of like, because that's the anxiety, right? It really holds
Mm-hmm.
you hostage and it debilitates.
Yeah.
Once you allow yourself to go into this, like, you know what, yes, you can help me in this way. You slow that discomfort or that fear starts to minimize because now you have evidence that you're not going to melt, right?
Yeah.
That the world is not going to go into shambles because you allow
Yeah.
someone to hold the door or like
Yeah.
order food because you were too busy doing this and versus you trying to do everything at once, right? So
Right.
it really requires, can I allow myself to be uncomfortable?
Mm-hmm.
And can I ask,
Yeah.
do I want this to be the continuous narrative for me? Do I want to relate to others in this way? Because we're social beings, right? This whole like separation and like hyper independence is not how we are as human beings, as creatures.
Not real.
We are collective. And it
Yeah.
doesn't mean being collective in enmeshment, because then that's a whole other conversation, right? There are
Mm-hmm.
many cultures that are also enmeshed, but it's like, how do we create some sort of equilibrium of back and forth and knowing where we have to set boundaries, where can we be collective, collaborative, and where do we maybe have to step out? But if it does require a lot of like questioning and learning of our history, right? And how,
Right.
again, the roles we played in our family systems.
Right. For sure. For sure. Thank you so much. That was
Of
good.
course.
We're gonna go to the second scenario. So the scenario says, I am a new mother and I fear of becoming my mom as a parent. Because I am new to this, I am not sure how to navigate. However, while I was a child, I spent a lot of time getting yelled at, hit, disciplined for things I didn't personally see was wrong or I didn't understand where I went wrong. How can I make sure I don't repeat the cycle?
Hmm. Sorry to burst your bubble. You might repeat some of it because you're human, right? We're not perfect.
Mm,
Again, a lot of it can come unconsciously. And this is also as a mom, I think when we hit certain markers, it might not show up when you first become a mom and it's an infant, but when that child starts to develop their personality, again, they're relating
mm-hmm,
to you, you're gonna get triggered, right? My daughter's 11. She has triggered the shit out of me in so many different ways because it takes me back to when I was that age, right?
mm-hmm.
The fact that this person, or I don't know if they're hypothetical or not, but this person, right, like is acknowledging I want to do different.
Yeah.
That's awareness,
Yeah.
right? So that's progress, right? We think progress is like this huge behavior change. No, progress is identifying and becoming aware. I want to do things differently.
For
What
sure.
does that look like, right? You were yelled at, you were hit, right? You were disciplined, you didn't know what you did wrong when you got hit. So what would you like to do? So let's say if your child, when that your child gets older, does something in your eye that it's wrong, what is the approach? What are the possible approaches? Can I ask
Hmm.
my child if they saw that as wrong? How come
Yeah.
it's wrong? Right? Even asking yourself, because things again, the black and white, right? This
Yeah.
is wrong. Oh yeah, a child shouldn't share their opinion. That's disrespectful, right? It's something that our past generation would say, but do you really think that's disrespectful? Or are you going to allow
Hmm.
that child to express themselves, of course, in a way that they're not yelling or that are like you can set boundaries around that. But this person knows they don't want to repeat this. So again, props to that because there's
For
a lot
sure.
of awareness. And then it's like, how do you want to show up? What do
Yeah.
you need to do if a child does show up, your child shows up in a way and you're triggered?
Hmm.
I say, you know what? Pause. If I can remove myself, take a breather, whatever it is, we have to regulate. as parents, we need to acknowledge when we're triggered and what can we do to regulate to then come in with reason versus be reactive. What we see
Yeah.
a lot of the times is just a lot of little kids in adult bodies.
Mm.
That's what it is. Your inner
Literally.
child is triggered as shit. You can't emotionally regulate. So what do? You blame it on the kid. You hit them, you scream, well, no, it was your fault. If you didn't keep jumping for the fifth time, I wouldn't. That is appropriate behavior, right? We need to really learn and like ingrain that that is appropriate. Kids are supposed to push boundaries. They're going to be doing things because they're learning about the world.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we're going to let them do whatever we want. We just have to make sure that they're safe. And when that kid is in a different like baseline state, we then have these conversations, but then we also teach them. So again, if you don't want to be a yeller, I work through that, right? A yeller, because that is normalized in my family and our culture, right? Yelling as a mom.
Hmm.
But you find ways. And again, how do you want to show up? We
Right.
say we don't want to do something, but then we don't know exactly what that is either. So if you want to do
Hmm.
something different, what are the possibilities and options?
Right.
And how can you allow yourself to learn with your child? And again, it's
Hmm.
okay to mess up because we're going to most likely do things that we saw because we're not perfect. And you're
Yeah.
not going to be super conscious about everything all the time because a lot of it is just automatically, particularly if our emotions are heightened. So again, how do you minimize? Asking yourself, how do you think you can show up? But also really learning how to self-regulate when you do get triggered because children do trigger the shit out of you. But we have to learn how to self-regulate before we can even do anything.
Yeah. Oh my God. That the biggest thing. Well, first off, you said a lot of great things, but just giving yourself grace because you are human and you will repeat certain things. Like you just said, like very unconsciously, not even being aware of it. And but the best thing that you could do is start somewhere. Just start. Being able to identify like I don't want to continue to go through these same cycles. I don't want to raise my children the same way. Know that there are some things that you're not going to be super aware of, but work through them. Like you said, like that was a great tip to just walk away and not really, figure out is this wrong? Is this age appropriate behavior or is this something else? Like really shifting through what's happening.
And one last thing is you need community, you need support, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of the times our parents or mothers function in this way because they didn't have the support, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's so much stress, and then the stress now added with the kid's behavior that's triggering is overstimulated. We're as moms, we're overstimulated all the time, and it shows up
Mm-hmm.
as anger or whatever. But it's our nervous system is out of whack because there's so much
Yeah.
happening, right? We have so much stress, and could only imagine from our parents again, the older
Mm-hmm.
generation. So also, if you have an active partner, right, who's involved is
Yeah.
can you both talk about what does that look like? So if he starts
Right.
to notice that you're a little shaky, can he step in and you like tap out, right? It's like your
Back
turn
up.
to come,
Yeah.
right? Like having these conversations. This is not something that she has to do on her own. This is something that
Right.
she speaks to her partner because they're a team as parents and acknowledging well, and the vice versa. If dad also, okay, how can I jump in?
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's not something that she needs to change on her own. It's as a collective. It's
Mm-hmm.
how can we talk about how we want to raise our kids and how can we
Yeah.
support each other in these difficult moments because it's not for one person to figure it out.
For sure. Definitely community is huge. Even whoever you got in your community, definitely lean on them, especially when you need a
Mm-hmm.
break. Because I'm not a parent, but I know parents become very overstimulated. Often, if your child is just doing so much and doing, moving around, you just need a break. So definitely leaning on your community. All right, we
Mm-hmm.
got one last thing, but this is the chat session. So this is when people write in and give their stories and they kind of want I'm not gonna say advice because I don't want to give advice. I give suggestions um, on or my opinions on what they should do. So this person wanted to stay anonymous, which is completely fine. And it reads, I am in my late 20s and I have been in my relationship for over 5 years with sorry, my relationship with my fiance has been going pretty well. However, we are getting close to our wedding date, and I have something to share with him. I'm not interested in having children. I feel like we have thought about having children before. However, that's all it's been, just a thought. My fiance and I have been able to travel the world so far, and by having children, we will have to stop having fun and tend to our new children. And I'm not sure if I'm what to do that or I'm ready to do so. How should I have this conversation with him? Or should I not bring it up at all and wait until something comes up if it does?
No, no, no. We're not waiting for anything. That is a disaster. Like, no. Well, anonymous person. One, I just want to validate, right? It's one, romantic relationships are hard. They're difficult. It takes a lot of work, and I want to validate because there's certain themes and topics that
Mhm,
are really complex, and children is one of them, right? I'm currently working with a queer couple. I've been working with them for like 2 years. So I've been part of their process in so many transitions, but
mhm,
children is one of them that we're kind of slowly touching up on. And it's a
mhm.
big, loaded topic, right?
Yeah.
So before, I would suggest speaking to him prior,
Mhm.
even getting married, because it's not fair for yourself or for him,
For sure.
because it's a big thing. But I would say, like, can we, before going into I don't want kids or I do want kids, again, black and white, it's
Mhm.
can we just sit in the gray area? Ask yourself, what
Mm.
are the fears, right? Like when you first thought of it and you entertain, like what did those conversations actually look like with your partner?
Right.
Was it just like touching point or did you go into deep? And if not, that is a suggestion of like how can you go deeper once you have the conversation. But before then, it's like, what are the fears? Can we
Mhm.
really become curious of what are the fears from both ends, right?
Right.
The fears, but also the gains, right? We sometimes want to get, again, when we are anxious or fearful, we just get so sucked into like the problem saturated story of what's not going to work out that
Mhm.
we don't allow other options or alternatives. And it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you have to go either side. It's like, can we just explore everything? What
Mhm.
are the fears? You did mention if we have kids, we're not going to be able to travel. That's a lie. I have children. I still travel.
Yeah.
I know plenty of families that travel, right? There's so many like travel content creators out there that support traveling families. So
Yeah.
you would
Mhm.
have the resources. So I just kind of want to challenge that thought.
Yeah.
But also, what are the deeper things? Like, yes, there's going to be a change. There is an identity change. There is a change, and again, in your relationship. But what are the fears? And if you can write some of these things down, it's what are the fears of having children,
Mhm.
right? What are the fears of not having children? I think there's still fear
Yeah.
in that, right? The what ifs. As humans, we kind of go into that. Like, really allow yourself to explore what are these feelings that are coming up of anxiety and fear and
Mhm.
uncertainty when it comes to children. And then how can you invite your partner into that conversation? Why? Because
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I always suggest if you are kind of spiraling based on a conversation or something that has to do with someone else, we need to bring the other person into it. That is
Yeah.
not for you to figure out on your own because it's a relational
Mhm.
issue. It's not an individual, it's a relational, right? If that's your mom, if that's your, and then we can talk about what that looks like, but
Mhm.
invite him in. But first, explore and reflect what are your fears overall of having or not having, right? And kind of allow yourself to explore if possible, and then
Yeah.
bring it up to him, right? Like that you're having fears. We don't want to jump into like a decision
Yeah.
or making a choice because again, it's a relational one. And it's like, hey, I've
Mhm.
really been thinking about this and it is something scary.
Yeah.
Why? Because now you're transitioning into a different committed space in your relationship. And I don't think it's fair for yourself to feel all of this, to self sabotage, to feel all this fear and anxiety. And it's not fair for him because now you're making a choice individually when it's a relational.
Yeah.
And
I
again,
couldn't
these
agree
are
more.
scary conversations, right?
Yeah.
But we have to allow ourselves because, yeah, you can just wait until something comes up, but then that doesn't make anything better. It actually ends up
Exactly.
disturbing even more because it's like, how come you didn't mention this before? And you
Mm-hmm.
can work on it and navigate what that may look like. But if you just wait
Mm-hmm.
for something to come up, it's going to be much harder to repair that relationship versus
Yep.
when it's still pretty fresh, which is now like, I'm uncertain about this. So why
Yeah,
not just invite? So that would be my suggestion is self-reflection, navigate that, and then bring up the conversation before getting married.
for sure. I couldn't agree more. Definitely don't wait. That is like a recipe for disaster, especially because the longer you wait to think or have these conversations, you'll end up you could possibly end up festering more thoughts, and end up, like you said, spiraling on a conversation that should not be held by yourself. Um, Especially for me, for example, I am like an overthinker for sure. So if I don't get it out, if I don't talk, please, my brain, my mind would go and go and go and go, and it will not be okay. So don't have those conversations by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely bring it up as soon as possible. And I like what you said about sitting in the gray areas and actually figuring out what is your fears? Where is it coming from? What is the fears on both sides? I really like that you said that. Figure out the fears on both sides and figure out where you are getting some of your ideas from of like not being able to travel with children. Where did you get those from? Is that true? Not, taking time to not personalize certain things or not letting outside influences kind of influence you negatively, just making sure that you're ideas are your own.
And I just want to add one more thing to that. And if it's right, if you're having a really hard time, I would suggest even doing a few sessions with a couples therapist where they can
Mm-hmm.
be the facilitator and support
Yeah.
you in cultivating language and support him as well in this space, right? Because I think being able to have someone that can like show up, right, who can
Mm-hmm.
have the tools and kind of not help you navigate just
Yes.
allows, right? It's a tool, right? It really allows you to know that you can do this in any difficult area of the
Yeah.
relationship, right? And it's just going to add to then the foundation that you're creating before marriage. And on top of that, again, like what are the narratives? The same way as if travel is so important to you too, you get to decide what that looks like. Again,
Right.
think about how we're told how we're supposed to be in marriages or with the work that we're supposed to do. This is just another thing that life changes
Mm-hmm.
after like you get married. Yes, it's going to change, but you get to decide what that change looks like, right?
Right.
I know parents, for me, I never let my child's sleeping schedule impact me going out. Boy, you're going to sleep in the car, right? Like my life is, you know how there's parents are like, oh yeah, I can't do this because that's like little Timmy is like, I don't know, nap time. No,
Yeah.
you're going to nap in the, because that's okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to allow for flexibility. And I think every parent has a choice to do that. But
Right.
again,
For
right,
sure.
being able to explore both. What would it look like if
Mm-hmm.
you don't have children? Outside of traveling, it's like in your entire relationship. But we have to
Mm-hmm.
hold space for both, for you and then also for your partner, because it is a relational discussion and it's going to impact both of you in so many different ways,
For sure.
right?
Well, thank you. Again,
All right.
everybody, remember to write in. I appreciate all that has already started to write in. I am getting a few, which I love. So definitely write in. I'm definitely gonna put my email again below. So we end each conversation with filling in the blank of I don't know who needs to hear this, but so pretty
Okay.
loaded, but so what would you say? I don't know who needs to hear this, and this is kind of like based on the conversation we had or in general. I don't know who needs to hear this, but
I don't know who needs to hear this, but you are brave and courageous, right?
oh, that was nice.
Our minds, again, anxiety, and I'm going to frame inside out too, because I think it's a great visual of how anxiety can really like debilitate and take over
It
how
was
we
an
truly want
amazing
to
visual.
be. Yeah.
It
So
was
I don't know
crazy.
who needs to hear this, but you can be brave and courageous.
Mm,
And once you take that leap, you get to really see and really fully go into your authentic self individually, but also in any relationship you're a part of.
nice, nice. I like that one. All right, so I'm gonna go too. So I don't know who needs to hear this, and I'm kind of gonna steal a little bit, but don't be afraid to sit in the gray area. Like everything doesn't have to be black and white. I really like that you said that. So I don't know who needs to hear this, but enjoy the gray area. Question a lot, and navigate through that and allow yourself to feel like it is okay.
Yes, and you don't have to figure it out like now, right?
Yeah,
Life
no.
is about unfolding and unlayering and figuring it out. Like
Mm-hmm.
there isn't this rush. So I also love that being in the gray area.
Okay, so do you have anything upcoming? Thank you so much for joining, by the way. This was amazing. This was such an impactful and amazing conversation. I didn't know which way it was gonna go because we've been fishing the topics but this was
Mhm.
amazing. Like hands down, probably my best so far. So thank you so much. I don't know if you have anything up and coming. Again, I will put all of your like your social media platform in the comments below so you guys know where to find her. Like I just said, she had an amazing recent Instagram live conversation that I thought was super helpful. So if you guys want, you guys can go check it out. I definitely encourage you guys to go check it out and follow her and do all the things. So I don't know if you want to plug in like your Instagram or what you got going on or anything.
Yeah, I'll definitely share my Instagram and my website. So Instagram is Shelia Arias underscore LMFT. And
Mm-hmm.
my website is compasiontherapy.com, which is compassion, but just with one S.
Mm-hmm.
I am maybe taking on one or two clients like towards the end of the August because I've
Mm-hmm.
been going through transitions in my practice. But I am hoping down the line to do workshops, especially like couples, relationship, right? And when I say
Mm-hmm.
relationship, it doesn't matter where you are in your relationship. I know a lot of therapists or relational coaches, they focus on like marriage, but I want to focus on any like just committed
Mm-hmm.
relationship, no matter what that may look like, and really
Yes.
supporting them with tools and understanding how, again, our family dynamics impact how we show up, and
Mm-hmm.
how they can feel empowered in their relationship. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping to have more of those conversations on my social media. I'm still kind of building up on that. So it's a process, but feel free to reach out. I'm always open to having conversations or supporting, or even in the process of finding a therapist, because I know that can be
Mm-hmm.
hard as people of color to do that. I have amazing colleagues that I can always refer out to if I'm not taking clients. But yeah, thank you, Raquel, for this
Nice.
space and just for
Oh,
really cultivating, I think, again, a space that's so needed for many of us.
for sure. Thank you.
All right, family, this concludes our episode of Uncomfortable Conversations. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. We'll see you next time.